Greetings, this is the Question GM. I hope this is streaming. I just made some changes to some of my adjustments and I think I had to fix them again. But in any case, I'm back with another video for my Quickstarter project, which is basically I try to play a new game, a new quick start every month. But apparently that plan has definitely gone on to the wayside. I think I'm averaging about a new quick start every 2 months, and given recent events that's been happening in my life, that plan would probably derail even furthermore. So I'm now currently aiming to just play up to 6 games for this year, 2019, and maybe I'll continue the rest if I have the chance for 2020. So now I'm going to be moving on to game number 4, which means I only have about 2 games left, which I've already decided what I'll be doing, but I haven't had any proper plans for running them yet. But coming back to game number 4 that I've picked to run this year is this little game called Alternity. Now, if some of you who've played from the 3.x days of Dungeons & Dragons from Wizards of the Coast, you may have recalled the name Alternity before. It was I would believe it might have been the official license system to run a StarCraft RPG, and I actually believe they actually created a box set for it that was published by Wizards of the Coast. And the Alternity is sometimes said to be the predecessor to the 3rd edition rule set for Dungeons and Dragons. And if you read the quick start rules, or at least how the design of Alternity feels like, you would actually feel a lot of any reminders and residues of the 3.0 design. But in any case, this version of Alternity that I have right in my hand right now, I believe is supposed to be you could say something to be supposed to be a revised version of the original game that came out, I believe it's 1999, and the creators who are Richard Baker, Chris Nolan, and Schubert, who were the original designers from Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition, has since moved on from Wizards of the Coast and started their own gaming company called Sasquatch Studios. So I believe this is their first game under the new banner, and I think they've only recently released their new set of core rules and supplements for the Alternity line. I believe it's this year, and this quick start actually came out last year, I believe, as a reward for the Kickstarter, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe it was just one of the promises that came with the Kickstarter. But in any case, this quick start Alternity is now available on DriveThruRPG for free, and I decided to pick it up, having missed my chance with the original Alternity back in the days, and decided that, hey, if they're releasing this revised version and they're giving a quick start for it, now is probably a better time than ever to really get into Alternity and see what the praises were about. Because I actually have one of the reasons I was attracted to the Alternate system was that it had received quite a number of praises actually, in comparison with many of the D&D designs even back then. So, what were the other reasons that I picked up Alternity? First of all, I think some of the other reasons that I picked up Alternity was that I believe I had run Murders and Acquisitions Incorporated in my last game before I decided for my next game. And during the interim, after I ran Murders and Acquisitions, I was actually introduced to a board game, which many of you may know as Twilight Imperium. So yes, it's that expansive space saga, multiple factions vying for a intergalactic throne and a home and a central planet. And I don't think I had actually fully found a proper sci-fi system or space-based space adventure system that I wanted to run. I wanted to start learning how to run, even if it's not a genre exactly that I'm most familiar with, but if I I was looking for a sort of a gateway system to get into that. And I know there are many other renowned and maybe revered space sci-fi systems that are out there, but Alternatives happens to be in my radar at the time, and I was interested in the system given its history and background. And I felt that what better time to get into it, and also the attachment that I have with the StarCraft franchise. I didn't get to play the original StarCraft box set, but I definitely had been curious like what would the system that could play the StarCraft universe look like, and so it was a convergence of all these interests and timing. That I felt that now is a good time to get into the alternative system. So what's inside the quick start? Well, it's actually a very, it's a sizable quick start for as far as quick starts go is about 37 pages, uh, and it's put out in this the usual two column layout. It's got interest it's got stylized fonts, but that doesn't get too fancy, neither does it get too minimalist. So it does its functional, uh, and it has plenty of tables for things that you need to know. For example, like the most obvious one would be equipment. uh, but one thing that I've noticed in this quick start that I have not seen in the quick start that I've run so far is the design notes. And it's actually kind of strange to include design notes in a quick start stage, because I would think that's actually much more useful information to put inside a core rule book, and maybe there's more space into it. But I actually highly appreciate the designers deciding to put the design notes within the quick start version of the rules itself, and they explain some of their general philosophies and ideas of why the system is put together in that way. And that actually gives a lot of insight for the GM to know how to use the system to their advantage, or know how to adjudicate better, knowing what the design intent was behind those systems. So it's definitely and I think it's actually kind of interesting to put this in the quick start, because for me, I think a quick start should be able to sell the system as the GM or the players go along with it. So having some fundamental design notes included into the document itself, I think, is a very good way to sell uh, the system to whoever's reading it or running it or playing it, and definitely is very interesting to me. As well as another good layout design I would feel that was included inside the quick start as well was the examples and the tables, and the sidebar examples, I'm sorry, where they give. And this is also something that I think is rarely done in quick starts, because there's just not enough space to include examples after explanation of rules. But given the learning nature of quick starts and the introductory nature of quick start, I think the examples there are actually even more valuable to be in a quick start rather than in other places, uh, or even in core rules. And I would think that these examples are much better in the core rules, but in the quick start they are well appreciated. So what's inside the 37 pages? Well, basically page 1 to 2 is basically page 1 to 2 here is basically where you have your covers and your credits, and there are some notable credits that I think we should be mentioning here. Let's see. So the system design is done by Richard Baker, David Noonan, and Steven Schubert. Adventure design is done by Richard Baker, which is included at the end of the quick start. Editing and layout is done by David Noonan, so I'm guessing a lot of the ideas and the formatting was by Noonan, which I'll give props to that. And then art direction is done by Richard Baker. And speaking of the art inside the quick start, it uses a relatively interesting, almost abstract form of art rather than something that's more comical or something that's uh, more line driven or more serious or something that's more cinematic. Not exactly sure if I have any comments about the art direction that they went for, but I guess it kind of suits with the generic nature of the system itself. Because if you have a very specific art, then I think it feels like it's only catering towards a certain kind of genre, which I don't think that Alternity is something that is going to be very strong on, in the sense that it's not really very well tied to a certain genre. and maybe we'll get into a little bit of that as we get into some of the deeper mechanics of the quick start and basically I guess the game in general. Then page three is basically a very basic introduction, and this being a generic system and all, there's really not a lot. There's really not a lot to talk about, other than just presenting that itself as a generic system and therefore it should be treated as such. Then page three to in the same page 3 to 4 is basically a breakdown of all the of the characters of the pre-gens and the character sheets that comes with the quick start. This is something I probably appreciate in the sense that it actually helps speed up my readings and breakdowns of the pre-gens that comes with the adventure. And also it also gives a bit of a roadmap of how to study the rules and knowing which areas connects to each other. And I think they specifically do point out which areas of the character sheet is related to which section of the quick start in itself. Although it does have the danger of running into repeating itself, and because there's a repetition and inconsistency of language, it can actually confuse understanding of rules to understand which mechanics is tied to which by name. But in any case, I think for this quick start, it was actually done relatively solidly, very sturdy. So it was a good introduction to get into the pre-gens, and I think it worked in that regard. And following on after that, it's where we start walking into the core mechanics of the system itself. And Alternity, on a very strong basis, is a skill-based system. There's a very long list of skills. It runs from page 5 to page 8, and you can imagine this is done in 2 columns. So I believe there's altogether, if I can just scroll it up, I believe there's altogether about 10 or so systems. Let me just see if I can draw that up real quick. They are all together. There are altogether 34 skills, so that's a really long list, and it's a pretty. I would say for a generic sci-fi, it's actually a pretty comprehensive list to start with. Although it can get a little bit more complicated than that. And one thing that I would have to say, as someone who comes from a D&D experience, it was a bit difficult to adapt to the idea that fighting skills are actually skills by themselves, rather than separate stats that we are also used to in 5th edition D&D and before that. But in any, I think that's actually something refreshing for me and something that I've been thinking about of doing in a different system, is that fighting skills should be a skill by themselves. Why should it be differentiated from any other normal skill that every system has? So and I feel that the explanations of the skills here are actually pretty sufficient, and there are actually some really heavy mechanics involved in each of the skills. But I think even with the short amount of space that they had dedicated to the skill, they managed to highlight most of the significant points or mechanics that are involved. So I think it's really useful. I mean, it's comprehensive enough to run for a quick start level of the rules. Although that does run into trouble that given the pre-gens, especially if you're introducing it to new players, they may overlook that the skills that they have is not mentioned in the quick start. They may overlook that there are special mechanics that are attached with the skills that they are given in the pre-gens. So it feels like that means there's going to be a lot more reading, and not just on the GM's part, but also on the player's part, which can be a bit challenging in that aspect, especially on the rule set that you want to get as soon as possible. So moving on to that, then we have, after skills, we have page 8 to page 10, which is where the gear description is. Now this is something where I feel there's a little bit of an overkill to the quick start, where in fact I've I doubt that this is the full extensive list of the equipment and gear that is available in the core rules, but the amount of choices and especially the amount of mechanics that are tied to them, especially some of them feel that there's a bit it's overstretched. Although I would say the quick start does a good amount of attachment connection with the quick start adventure in itself, that most of the equipment that's mentioned in the tables and in this quick start do exist within the pre-gens themselves, except for a few exceptions. But in any case, I think having that it makes it for a very heavy read, both for the player and the GM to prepare all the equipment that they could be involved. And I feel that some of these there's not a lot of enough differentiation between some of the equipment, that you don't feel any like why should the user why would a player with a certain equipment will not be able to do the same amount of damage or be as deadly a potential to using a different kind of equipment. So the equipment is probably it's not a major complaint for me, but it's just something that I've noticed when I started running the quick start adventure itself, and it just made me felt that despite all the good balance that the quick start has went on, this is kind of the area where it's like see a little bit drop in the quality check of making a very solid quick start. Okay, now moving on, we now move into page 10 and 12, which is actually where the core mechanics of the system is explained. And I think this is something that I'll talk about a bit more in depth later on, after this breakdown of the pages, because this is a very interesting system in my mind, of how which, don't get me wrong, it actually does really feel a lot like 3.0 and 3.5, but it introduces an additional attached on mechanic that ties with it, that I feel is actually something that I've wondered why was never really adopted as the main engine of third edition Dungeons and Dragons. And I would say even to some extent, why is this not the core engine that should be become 5th edition as well. But in any case, I think that's one of the selling points, I would say, or the uniqueness of the Alternity engine. And having read through it and reading a bit of the design side, the design notes that comes with it, this is something that I'm actually pretty fond of, I would say, as a core mechanic. But I think I'll get back to it later on, later in this video. Page 12 to 16 is where they explain the combat system. It sounds pretty extensive, and it actually is. There's a lot of options involved, there's a lot of decision points involved, there's a lot of optimizing involved, so to speak, and there's also a bit of subset rules. And the best part for me was actually the damage and durability section, that's on page 15, which is something that I've also thought about including in maybe in a Dungeons and Dragons game, or similar systems. And it's sort of a different take on the vitality point and wound point system from Star Wars, if any of you still remember that. And I actually do say that this actually combat in Alternity is generally pretty rough. You could say it's a little bit swingy at some times, but I think it makes combat a little bit quicker, at the same time more deadlier. And that's but without being less cinematic, I feel, which is something that I've been really looking for something for as a replacement for Dungeons and Dragons. And and I kind of glad that I didn't have to look very hard and very far to find a combat system that I'm digging right now, and hopefully I will get to see more iterations of this, either in different systems, or maybe in different versions of the Alternity rule set. Okay, after the combat section, from page 17 onwards up to page 36 is where we get into the quick start adventure proper. So as you can see, it takes up about half the book, half the quick start rules, which I think is, as any good quick start, that pretty much should be it. That pretty much should be how it's formatted and structured. And actually, to be honest, given the amount of depth that's available in the original, in the rules itself, I'm actually kind of impressed they actually managed to squeeze it all within 16 pages. Uh, so page 17 to the adventure descriptions are from page 17 to page 27. It's about 10 pages in, and then you have 2 pages dedicated to the NPC, to the monsters that are found in uh, the adventure, which is page 28 to 29. And then you have from page 30 to 35 is where you actually get all the pre-generated characters, followed by a back cover page, which kind of like sells out the rest of the product line, I think, for the Alternity, and also says that it's now available on Drive-Thru RPG. I believe there's about three books that came out from this line after the moment it was launched. So I believe if you decided to get into Alternity right now, you can pretty much get the entire set at the moment. There's all the planned products are currently now available on Drive-Thru RPG. So it's easy to get into Alternity and get a complete collection already from the start. I'm not sure if they do print on demand. It's something I probably look into, but as far as my knowledge right now is concerned, I'm not sure. I'm not aware of it. Now, so what is it about the core mechanics of Alternity that I liked? So the general idea is that it's still a D20 bit, a DC kind of system, but the DC is self-deterministic. So this is a trend that I don't know how long it's been going on, but it's actually been something I've noticed in a few of the games that I've run. I've been looking so far. I think one of it that did it was the Rabbit RPG. And I can't remember there was another system. It could be Axon Punk Overdrive, which was using a more 100 based system, and I believe there are actually, now that I think about it, I believe there's a lot of system that actually uses a lot of self-determined DC, which actually puts a very interesting look into how skills should achieve. It's not a matter of how difficult the task is. It's a matter of how good are you at how good is the character at doing their thing. And I think it's good in the sense that it takes off the burden for GMs to adjudicate a certain difficulty task, and and also at the same time give transparency to the players that they know how difficult it is. But you may be wondering that if the players already know what the DC is according to their own skills, then shouldn't they? Their chances of beating those DCs are also determined by how good they are in that skill, which is where this difficulty die system of Alternity comes in, which I feel is actually something that's very interesting, because because there is a scale of difficulty, it goes from, I believe it's from ordinary to very hard to very easy. Let me just see if I can get it. So there's a difficulty scale that runs. It's on page 11. I don't know if you can see it right here. It has a bunch of like a piece of cake, extremely easy, very easy, easy, moderately easy, ordinary. Then it goes on the reverse, moderately hard, very hard, extremely hard, and brutal. And each of these gives, depending on what the difficulty scale of the task is, it adds another dice to the roll, to the D20 roll. So for example, if let's say I'm doing a piece of cake difficulty task, it gives me a D20 bonus, which means I end up rolling 2 D20s and have to use that to beat my ability score to succeed on the task. And so definitely inversely, if I have a brutal task, it has a D20 minus a D20 to my roll, and I have to use it to determine to beat my my score to get a success. And that's I think a very interesting way to balance difficulty ratings, in the sense that because the players already know how far they have to beat. It's the GM is more put on the focus of trying to determine whether how easy or how difficult the task is, and therefore just throw in an additional die to modify that and make it a bit more random. But at the same time, it sort of rewards having to deal with an easy task, and also makes it more challenging to having to deal with a harder task at the same time. Because dice are involved as always, you have that small percentage chance that even with a piece of cake task with a plus d20, it's still likely for you to fail. As long as the dice gods are not helpful that day. But in the inverse, I feel having that mechanic, I think the other interesting thing for me was the success levels in alternative system, where if you succeed, they have a degree of success, which is also something that I've really been looking forward to and been looking for in many in D20 like systems, especially like something like D&D, that a natural 20 in D&D by proper raw rules that's written ruling is actually not a critical success. But in Alternity, it's built into the system, and it's something I've really liked. And they don't only have just critical success. They actually have 2 degrees of success, which is a excellent success if you beat your score by 5 or more, and if you beat it by 10 or more, you actually achieve a stellar success. Now, this is something that I've liked. I believe when I was running mergers and acquisitions, where you actually get a boon if you succeed on an extremely high level, and this is where the skills descriptions come in, because depending on the level of success that you gain, then you can actually do more with that skill once you've achieved that. So I really like the rewards that comes with successes in this system right now, because it really gives more rewarding feeling to the players, and when they're able to do something more than what the description skills provide them with. And I think that's something that has been missing, or something that hasn't made D&D such an interesting or rewarding system to play with in some areas and respects. Now, another thing that I found interesting about Alternity, and that was the combat system. Now, the combat system by itself is not far too different from the original D&D in terms of its attacks and hits, and how to determine armor class and all that sort of thing, which uses different names, by the way. But in any case, I think the one that really caught my attention was the initiative system and the impulse system. And this was something that I only started after reading Alternity. I started noticing this idea of impulses has actually been used in other games, and I've wondered why we've actually never seen this as prevalent as in many other systems, especially in D&D. I think it makes a lot of sense to put it into D&D, given the complaints that D&D combats can take arduously long, and between turns, players have to wait for a very long time between turns as the higher the level their goals. So if to explain it very briefly, is the idea of impulse is that every action that you decide to do in a round has impulse cost. So for example, I think a good example here would be, let me see if I can find a good example. So for example, like an attack, and this is actually an attack would depend. It depends on the weapon that you're using. Causes 3 to 5 impulse, and you have to understand that the action round in Alternity is built almost like a clock, 8-sided clock, you could say, and basically there's impulse 1 to impulse 8 as a radial, and basically after determining initiative, everyone can start at different points of the clock. And let's say if I was at impulse 3 and I did an action that cost me 5 impulse, my next action will actually happen at impulse 8, which is technically the end of the round. So that actually means that you can, determining based on what sort of choices that you're making in combat, you can actually act multiple times within a round. And that's something that I found very interesting, because it puts into perspective that certain actions don't cost as much as others do, and it also helps to eliminate that action economy, in the sense that players tend to optimize what kind of actions they can do within their turn, to and then it can sort of like complicate the whole matter, because every action that they perform within the same turn can take a certain amount of time to accomplish, to resolve, and then it moves on to the next action, and then before it moves on to the next player. So I had some doubts actually when I saw this impulse and initiative system, that I was thinking it actually will make the game feel a lot longer. But in my experience, when I actually did the running of this during the with the actual players, it was actually much faster than I thought, and it actually cut down a lot of the waiting time between actions. That may be partly because of the options that are available to the players in the quick start, but I don't imagine the designers have that much options to play with, or to expand that much options to make impulse calculation game very very time consuming, in the sense that the players, instead of optimizing types of actions, they'll be optimizing the least amount of impulses to perform within a turn. In any case, I think it's still very interesting for me, because it's basically just one choice. Just choose one action, and then you would know when is your next turn coming up. And it's also interesting that it puts a little bit of the onus on the player to calculate their own initiative, rather than on the GM, who has to keep track of it. Although I would have to say it definitely helps to have a tracker of some kind, and this is something that I would think justifies a more specialized tracker to keep track of initiative stress impulses. Now, and the other thing that I liked about the alternative system is how they deal with damages, and in effect, and they have this thing called a durability track. So I believe anyone who's played World of Darkness would be quite familiar with this idea of a box system for wounds. Alternity uses a very similar one, and it actually sort of divides the wounds by different types of severity. So we are coming here from, I believe it's grazed. Let me see if I can find. Yes, so that's on page 15. You can see here they have this interesting table of severity. You have grazed, you have light wounds, you have moderate, serious, and then goes up to mortal wounds. And the interesting thing for me is that, because what kind of wounds that the characters incur is based on the amount of damage that is dealt. So this actually puts a lot of emphasis on less hits, more damage, to actually finish off monsters or adversaries. And this is definitely something that works very well against the D&D philosophy, where it's just a rundown of hit points and numbers. And every hit doesn't mean anything until maybe the last few hits, and that's probably one of the factors that contributes to the dragging on of combat in Dungeons and Dragons. And the best part of this is that, depending on the damage that you deal, you can actually bypass certain severities of damage. And then if the monster has only, say, 3 boxes for severe wounds, if you cross out those 3 boxes, they are as good as dead, even if they still have pre-existing lighter wounds to deal with. So combat is actually much more, I could say, a little bit fast-paced, but at the same time, it doesn't have to go through the motions, so to speak. There's a sense of randomness and a rewarding chance of you to score a critical hit and actually end the combat much earlier than expected. And I feel that actually really contributes a lot to making combats faster and more fun in that way. So those are the things that I've generally liked about the alternative system in the quick start I've seen so far. If there's any real challenges that I had, was actually understanding the initiative, or determining of initiative, because there was this whole order of who goes first based on the number of success they roll on their one of their checks, I believe, one of the skills, I believe. But all in all, I would say this alternative probably comes close to an ideal system that I've been thinking about since I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons, and it's a very good alternative solution or substitute to keeping to many similar ideas that D&D has, but at the same time also being something that's really entirely different at the same, that changes how the game is played, but not necessarily how the game is played. Uh, so now on to the quick start adventure itself, which is called the Wreck of the Magellan. Long story short, is basically just the players playing as a group, a crew of scout ships sent to find a wreckage, or a ship that's gone missing, since they were last reported to be finding alien artifacts. And lo and behold, after they found the wreckage and deciphering all the clues, they find out that the crew has been possessed by some kind of alien, and then there's a potential optional ending where they actually do find an alien and actually come down to a showdown. Now, uh, there's nothing really, generally nothing wrong with that premise and the basic idea. Although it's not something that I feel very comfortable running with a group, especially when it involves an alien that can sort of turn itself invisible, or at least wipe its existence off from the minds of players. Not something that I feel particularly fair or interesting. And to be honest, I think the weakest part of the entire quick start for me was actually the adventure. It was a little bit hard to prepare because, given the skill-based design of Alternity, I felt that it sort of uses that skill-based design as its basis a bit too much, in the sense that the designers the designer was actually predicating a lot of what the PCs can do based on the skills, rather than what on the PCs will do and then finding a skill for it. So I think I feel that's a pretty big shame, or a missed opportunity for a system like for Alternity. I think it's really more appropriate given the extensiveness of the skill list. There's like 30 over skills. I think it's actually more that it's not hard to find a skill for something that the players will think up, rather than trying to think of everything that the skills can do in a given situation. So it actually made it a lot harder, because I had to second guess every skill check that was actually provided within the adventures, and I had to sort of like break it down into something that was more flexible, and just in case the players want to do something that was a bit unexpected from what is written in the quick start adventure, and finding a proper skill for it. And naturally, there was the case of overemphasis on certain skills over others. And I think the one that was actually most underused and underrated within the system was actually the social skills, even though there were actually only a couple of occasions where the players could actually use the social skills. But the way the adventure was written is that the PCs, the adventure was written to emphasize that the PCs could use this skill to do this, to calm down some of the survivors, rather than, if the PCs want to calm down the survivors, these are the skills they could have used. So I don't know if you can see where I'm coming from with this approach, in the sense that how much space and troubles and worries that can be easily resolved or sidelined if the writing approach and the approach of using the skills could have been a little bit more thought out. And when I decided to run Alternity, I was running it for a mini convention, local game convention of sorts, with a group of mixed new players, players who are completely new to RPG. Difficult to pitch this game, because I wanted to keep a very strong emphasis, strong focus on what the game is really about. But given the generic nature that comes with the quick start, I had to sort of crack my head a little bit to make it a bit more palatable, rather than just telling people that it's D&D in space, even though that actually may send a lot of different wrong kinds of signals to people who came into the game. Nevertheless, it actually became one of my strangely most anticipated game. I think we could say that. The moment the offers went out, it was actually the fastest filling game of that convention. Before, and maybe that was partly due to the fact that of its sci-fi nature, and maybe there weren't a lot of other games that was running at the same time. So I was actually kind of happy with the response that was given the difficult nature to actually sell the game. But when the group came together and we started, and I had to do a much butchered version of the Quickstart adventure because of time constraints. I actually had to make it a lot more. I had to take off like a few entire scenes, and I had to, and it was actually a bit difficult for the players to grasp where I wanted them to go, based on how the direction of the adventure went. So there was actually, there was a lot of wrangling going on, and at the same time, uh, because these players were not exposed to the quick start beforehand, so I had to sort of explain some of the rules at the same time, which was actually gets a little bit awkward sometimes. But in any case, I think overall the quick start adventure turned out. Uh, it gave me some new insights into how the game actually runs compared to how it reads, which is always a good thing. But at the same time, I have received some complaints that they felt the the combat was actually a bit monotonous or repetitive. But I think that falls more on the players not knowing what the options they have at the moment, and it was also very difficult for them to try to understand that if they had actually tried to optimize their attacks and with the options that they have as a character, then they will actually have been able to end the combat faster. And it was also and the challenge or the thing that I really felt most when running the game was that the adjudication of the difficulty die and finding the proper scale, and always having to refer to the scale, to the table scale at every decision point when a ability check skill check is involved. It actually does slow the game a bit down, and I think I think it's something that's, it's a matter of practice. As long as the players start being able to memorize that it's what are the steps of the dices, from a D4 to a D8, D10, D12, and D20. But they definitely did struggle with that concept of rolling a D20 plus a potential die, and in the pre-gen themselves, they are always given a secondary die from a certain kind of equipment. So they're always having to remember that did become a challenge for the players. But overall, what do I think of Alternity? I really, like I said, I really like the system in itself, in its design philosophies, in how the mechanics really work. They are definitely but doesn't always necessarily translate well on the table. But it still has created a good impression on me. I really like running the game. Although I would actually have gone on to a very different direction of running of the quick start adventure that was given here, and that's probably something I might do in a future, future running of this quick start if I ever decided to do it again. But the real challenge I think for me to really get into Alternity is that it sells itself as a system for a very specific genre, which is space sci-fi. And aliens and all that sort of thing. I definitely would have loved to see an alternate fantasy-based version of this rule set, and you know I don't think it's something that Sasquatch Games is actually interested in doing, maybe, but maybe in a very far future. But I think it has very interesting core mechanics that I really want to get into and get used to. But I'm not sure if I can get a lot of mileage out of it, of running the system within a space sci-fi genre. And I think it really boils down to having to get the entire collection of Alternity right now. Although that in itself is also a challenge for me, because I don't think my current group is actually the biggest fan of space sci-fi. So that's basically my experience with Alternity. It's definitely a system that I'll be looking into a lot more. Looking forward to see any different renditions of it. But time will only tell when will I actually get to run a full game of Alternity. So I hope this video is has given you insight and information that you may or may not want about Alternity and the quick start of it. And if you really want, I would wholeheartedly recommend anyone who's a little bit tired of the D&D philosophies and the D&D mechanics to really give Alternity a try, and you might find something that's something a bit more intuitive compared to what the currently D&D has to offer. So I think that'll be all for this video. I'm not sure when I can do my next Quickstarter video because I haven't been able to run that next system yet, and I'm still in the midst of sort of learning the ropes, and it may take a while for me to actually run the system, given my current gaming schedule, the current lack of gaming schedule right now. But in any case, I hope I'll get to do it soon, and I'll be back with another video for my next game, which I'll probably not mention it right now. You'll know it when I come back from my next Kickstarter video. So this is the Questing GM signing out for now, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.